Think for yourself. Question authority. Think for yourself. Question authority.
Welcome to the Paradox Collective. Today we have a medium with us, someone whose hand has been on the pulse of the paranormal, of the weird, of the unexplainable since she was a child. We're going to sit down with Patricia Dunn and we're going to have an in depth conversation about the paranormal, about the world, about clairvoyance and everything related.
Oh,
Patricia,
thank you. Thank you.
hi.
Hi. Thank you both for having me.
No, thanks for coming
It's
on.
our
Thanks for coming
pleasure.
on. Give us a little bit of background into your life, Patricia. What has
Okay.
brought you to this point? I know you're also a an author. You've written some books. You've actually created some tarot cards. So you've got a lot going on there, don't you?
I kind of do. It's been like that my whole life. ADHD person on top of everything else. But it began for me, as you said, very early in my life. I was 2 years old, going on three, when my older sister died. She was 18, and it was a shock. She died of an undiagnosed heart defect. And so I had an incident right around the time of her death, where I fell down a flight of stairs, a steep, narrow Brooklyn, um, flat, very, very narrow, very steep, very old, rickety flight of stairs, because my mother kind of lost hold of me. She was putting a snowsuit on me. And what happened was two hands sort of escorted me down the stairs. I never ever touched the ground until they gently set me on the landing. Um, Of course, I was too young to know that that was unusual. It felt to me like a ride in the park, like on the slide. My
Huh.
mother was hysterical. And, as time went on, I would hear her telling my relatives, my aunts and things, that my snowsuit, which is what she was trying to put on me, and I was resisting, saved my life. Well, I knew this wasn't true, but I couldn't understand why she wasn't talking about the hands. And as time went on, I realized there weren't supposed to be hands and that this was something really unusual. And I think, honestly, having had many, many, many decades now to kind of review that in my mind, my belief is that that opened something up in me. That opened up maybe a hole in the filter between this world and the next. Some people call it the veil. Kind of the way I see it is that how I've come to think of this is that if you have a high tension wire outside your home, 50,000, 75,000 volts,
Mm,
your house can't handle that. So we have like a step down transformer that allows only 220 volts to enter your home where you can use it. I
right.
think our brains function, our physical brains function as a step down transformer. But I think for some people, and for all people at some time in their lives, but for some people, that step down transformer gets a little damaged and more things are able to actually enter through that veil.
Yeah. So like
So I
once the
think that,
veil's pierced, it's like once
yep,
the veil's pierced, it seems like it's there's it's like a membrane, where you
yeah, yeah,
once something goes through there or things start to pass through there, you have the ability maybe it's a little bit easier for you to really kind of see the see what's behind that veil, huh?
that's how I feel. I feel like, and I also feel that, really what the veil is for we human beings is our five senses. We the only way we interact with the world is through these very limited five senses. Even our visual context is way smaller than the visible spectrum. We
Yeah.
only see a tiny, tiny bit. Somebody described it once as if is the visual spectrum with the Mississippi River, we see about 2 inches. You know,
Yeah. We don't see
so
down
there's
to the
so much
bottom.
going on around us that we're not able to perceive because of the way our bodies are designed.
Hmm.
So that began a journey in life, and I was raised in a very Catholic home. My father was actually orphaned and raised by the Christian Brothers in a monastery.
Hmm.
So it doesn't get too much more Catholic than that.
Yeah.
and there was a lot of fears around these kind of things. So I learned not to talk about it. I learned not to express myself, and it's also just the way the world was back in those days.
As someone who grew up, I actually, believe it or not, grew up also in a religious background. Like I'm adopted.
Mhm,
My both of my
mhm,
parents, like I'm a person of color. Both my parents are white Catholics,
mhm.
extremely religious.
Right.
So I grew up in a religious home as well, and I mean, like
Mhm.
I can relate to the stigma that comes with the paranormal.
Right.
Paranormal. I
Right.
remember at a young age, I wasn't allowed to read the Harry Potter books. I wasn't allowed to play D&D. All those
Right.
things were stepping stones to the occult, quote unquote.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I so I can totally relate to that. And
Mhm,
also it's interesting because coming from that background, it
mhm.
was difficult to kind of articulate some of the things that happened to me as a young age too. Like I had some
Right.
really interesting experiences, and they were always written off as, oh well, it's they're whole, pigeonholed. Either it was, oh, it was a demons, or it was just,
Right.
it's all imagination. So
Yep.
it's difficult too. Also coming from the Catholic side,
Mhm,
I'm familiar. I don't know if you. I'm sure you are, but there's a thing that we go through, or that we are. It's kind of instilled in us that I
mhm.
call Catholic guilt.
Right.
You know,
Yes.
and that's and it's almost like there's with Catholicism comes the idea of the man in the sky with the lightning bolt. And if you
Yep.
do
Yep.
something
The
bad, you're
sky
gonna get
god.
zapped.
Yep.
Yep, you're gonna get
Yep.
zapped, and he's just
Mhm,
amorphous concept. But you know that
mhm.
if you do something bad, you're gonna be punished. And I
Yep.
had to
Yep.
really work my way out of at an older age, work my way out of that mentality, and try to find an understanding of a higher power that
Yes.
was loving and caring and not judgmental. And I think that
Yep.
um, a lot of times some of that stuff, and it might be an issue of kind of repression too, to where
Mhm,
being repressed from certain aspects of spirituality may
mhm.
kind of enhance those for us, or enhance some of
Yes.
the interactions that we have with the unknown.
Mhm.
So that's
I
really
think it makes
interesting
you
that you mentioned
vulnerable.
that. Yes.
It creates a vulnerability that may not have been there otherwise. Absolutely. And I think, they call that a gotcha god.
Yeah.
Gotcha,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm. Good way
But
to put it.
I think what happens is as you get older, hopefully, what you're able to do, Jung called it individuation, where we become our own person and we become stronger. And you have to be pretty strong to let go of those that fear drenched dogma, not only of Catholicism, but of all religions, particularly
Yeah.
Christianity for some reason.
Yeah.
It is guilt ridden. And I think, when I was 9, I had my second big experience in that my dad died. I was alone with him at the time. I was alone in the house. I had a premonition that morning. I was 9 years old, and I came from a dysfunctional family. My sister had died as when I was a child. As a result of her death, my brother kind of went. My older brother, he was 16 when I was born. He kind of went off the rails, got involved with gangs in Brooklyn, and wound up going to juvenile detention for 2 years.
The Sharks or the
And
Jets?
yeah, exactly.
Uh-huh.
You got that exactly right. My other sister was disabled and she had
Mm,
emotional problems. And here I was, and she was 12 years older than me. And here I was. I was kind of, I think in many ways, I was my parents' teddy bear because they were grieving, but I was also kind of neglected by them when they were grieving so much that they forgot they had me, kind of thing. I'm only surmising, because most of the things you don't remember from that age. So I had a
right.
very peculiar kind of upbringing in that sense. And
Do you
so
think that?
when I was 9, mom had to work because my father had begun having heart attacks in his 30s.
Oh
So he
no.
was disabled. Yeah, he had many heart attacks. Broken heart, a broken heart, and
Yeah.
it shows up on the physical plane. So anyway, this morning I love school. That was what I was going. I love school because it got me out of the house. It
Right.
got me out of the fighting and all the sadness and the dreariness and the stillness of my house. So this morning I got up and I just did not want to go to school and I couldn't figure it out. I just felt like my arms were heavy. I knew I wasn't sick, but I didn't want to go to school. And my mother gave me a hard time. She had to go to work. She was one of the few moms who worked in those days. And finally, she gave up on me and she left and went to work. Well, my dad died during the day that day. And I didn't even know it. I mean, here I was in my pajamas. I was a kid. I was 9 years old. I was upstairs in my bedroom because once she left for work and I knew I was going to be left home, that malaise feeling kind of went away. That premonition, which was just a feeling, went away. And I went downstairs. My dad was still in bed. And he said to me, "Pat, come here. Come give dad a hug," which he never did. He was not demonstrative. He was raised by brothers, you know. They were
Right.
not physically demonstrative people. And he wanted to give me a hug. And I remember it being so awkward. Like I had a hard time like understanding this. And I kind of remember one of the last things I remember was kind of pulling away from him, you know, going about my business. But I think he had a premonition too, because at some point during the day he died.
Mm.
And at some point during the day, I went downstairs and realized, wow, it's getting late and dad didn't even get up. So I went into his bedroom and reached out to, jostle him a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and his arm was ice cold.
Oh no.
So
So you found him.
I found him. And in one
Oh.
moment, my world changed. It should have changed way for the worst, which in many ways it did.
Mm-hmm.
But it also changed in a way that was so profound because I was drawn up into one of these shared death experiences
Tell me
where
about that.
I was with my dad. I was kind of sucked up and was in like an embrace with him, you know, a non-physical, spiritual kind of embrace. And I was conscious of a lot of things in that state. I was only a child, but I knew that there was a vastness around us. There was like a vast landscape around us. And I knew he was headed in that direction. And the words he said to me were, "Everything will be all right." And I can't tell you how many times I've heard those words since then in other people's near death experiences, in their afterlife communications with loved ones who've crossed. It's
Mm.
almost like a typical line that they use. Well, he used it too. Said everything will be all right. And it was
Mm.
just such a loving, warm, wonderful embrace. And I remember this impression of colors that were well beyond my ability to like comprehend. They weren't I can't. It was so hard for me to explain because it's our senses, but it's
Mm-hmm.
like an extension of the senses we have here.
It reminds me of,
Mhm,
like, for instance, so when I was young, there was the book The Giver, you know,
mhm,
where in the book described, like, it was a great concept because the book itself described a world without color, and then there was the one kid who could see
wow,
color, and it
wow,
was interesting how um they described it. I remember, like,
mhm,
I remember, see, it's been so long, but I remember reading the book and I remember saying the kid watching, I believe, people, it might have been two people or somebody throwing him an apple. Um but they threw an apple and he was like, the apple changed, and he couldn't really describe
mhm,
how the apple changed,
mm,
but it was not in, it didn't, get bigger or get smaller, but it just, and that was just the
yeah,
instance of, it was an interesting concept of
mhm, mhm,
somebody trying to explain colors to
yep,
somebody who that where to where they didn't exist. And I think
exactly.
that
Like a blind
that's,
person, right? Like a blind
yeah,
person. Explain blue to a blind person,
explain
right?
blue, explain the sky,
Mhm,
explain the shape. It's
right.
very interesting because a lot of that, like, a couple things I want to go back. We're gonna backtrack real
Mhm,
quick because
sure.
we're getting into some interesting stuff. Um, so I want to just shoot all the way back to your childhood. I want to ask you some really specific question about the hands.
Mhm.
Now, when they, what was it that gave you the impression that they were hands? Did you feel
I could,
hands? Did you see
yes,
hands?
I could feel the imprint on my back.
Okay, so you could feel that there were
I
hands
can
there.
I
Interesting.
can feel them right now as we speak. I can reconjure that feeling. I've never ever lost my ability to feel those hands.
Huh.
And
Okay.
maybe it's something because as a baby, people's hands are on you a lot, you're getting picked
Yeah.
up all the time, you know. So it was a very familiar thing, but what I do remember was these hands were huge. They
Yeah.
were way bigger than like my mother's hands, I could feel the impression of them. They traversed the entirety of my back kind of,
Okay. So they weren't. It wasn't just huge, as in like a large a large man's hands. They were more just very
Yeah,
large hands.
relative to whatever size I was at that
Okay.
point, they
Interesting.
were large.
Now, was there any was you said was there a feeling of calm? Were there any smells associated with
Mm,
this situation?
Here's what I recall. It felt as though I was in a bubble.
Okay.
It felt as though I was wrapped in a bubble. I guess silence. I don't
Mhm.
exactly recall that, but that would fit.
Mhm.
Of I felt as though I was encapsulated in a bubble of comfort and
Mhm.
and and safety is really what because imagine falling down a flight of stairs. Your
Mhm.
heart's in your throat, right?
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, it's one of our primal fears as human beings, the
Well,
falling.
yeah, and a
I
lot
didn't
of people
have
don't
that.
realize.
Yeah,
A
I didn't.
lot of people don't realize too is like one of the like the core reasons is like initially we were in the trees, so falling
That's
was
right.
that's scary. It's another
That's
reason
right.
why like
Yeah.
people are inherently afraid of the dark, is
Mm-hmm.
because like um according to my understanding, like the females used to sleep in the trees and the men would sleep on the ground, which is why
Mm.
people and children would be in the trees too, which is why a lot of children are afraid of things under the bed, things
Uh,
below them. You know,
Interesting. Yeah, that makes
yeah,
sense.
and
Yeah.
so it's a lot of the thing, a lot of our core, I want to
Hmm.
mention too, yeah, a lot of our core fears come from allegedly, where we, our initial where we came from,
Yep.
according to science,
It's
and stuff.
survival. Yep.
Yeah, and it's very interesting too.
Mhm.
Also how this really parallels a lot of the stories of guardian angels, which is a very
Yeah,
Catholic concept. I mean, in my opinion.
absolutely. Of
I
course,
remember.
I didn't have that concept at two.
Right,
You
right.
know.
And so that's very interesting
Yeah.
too. That
Mm.
because I remember reading books. I read books when I was young. There was like the Angels Among Us books. I can't remember the name of
Mm-hmm.
the titles, but they were like
Yeah.
books about all. It was a huge aggregate
Yeah.
of stories of guardian angels and people helping people and stuff like that. And what you're
Right.
describing is on par, with a lot of those stories.
Yes, and
You
those
know?
kind of stories I notice, where you're physically safe from something like that,
Yeah.
tend to be with children,
Yeah.
where you don't, it's those invisible hands. They
Hmm.
seem to be more with children than anything. That's what I've noticed because naturally, well, I became so interested in these topics at such an early age when there was virtually nothing out there.
Yeah.
I would scour my local little town library, scour it for topics, for books and things, and I very rarely could find things. And with my shared death experience with my dad, it wasn't until 1975 when Raymond Moody came out with Life After Life. Now, those were accounts of people's near death experiences. But
Hmm.
what I do remember was my dad, his voice, everything will be all right, did not come from the body. It came from above. It came from the ceiling. It came from the corner of the room in the ceiling. And I heard it in my head. That puzzled me for so long. But when I read his book, I read about accounts of people being above their body in the corner of the room, exactly like where my dad was.
Right.
And that kind of was a verification for me.
And I've heard
Um,
stories about that as well. People during surgery and stuff like that that are looking down as when something goes wrong, or just in general, like when
right.
they've because I believe obviously um drugs, and I don't mean
Hmm.
like I don't say hey everybody do drugs, but there are some mind altering substances that
Sure,
that can
sure.
elevate our plane, maybe put it in a different into a different vibrational state,
Break through
whatever you want
that
to call
barrier,
it.
right?
Yeah.
Break through the veil. Yeah,
Mhm. Yeah,
definitely.
and so I mean, maybe anesthesia or anesthesia, I should say, not anesthetic. We're
Right.
not talking about
Ayahuasca,
ru-
those kind of things.
yeah,
Yeah.
those type of things.
Hallucinogens. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of those
DMT.
things. DMT,
Yep.
there you go.
Yep. Yep.
Those things can really alter your mood or alter your mind to a
Alter.
point where you can see things from a different level of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So that
I
all makes
totally.
that so that
Yeah.
all makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What you're saying. So have you had any other like has your dad been with you since then? Have you had any other incidences where you felt his presence or a presence like that or?
Yeah, it was interesting. It wasn't until because I grew up without my dad and I grew up
Mm-hmm.
from such a young age that not really.
Mm,
Those were the years that I kind of learned to tune these things down and kind of avoid connecting with these things. But interestingly enough, many years later, when my mom passed, it was kind of an interesting thing with her. She died in December of 1999, right before Y2K. You're probably both too young to remember that.
oh no, I
I
remember.
remember.
I
Do you?
remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was very close with my mom. And for the next 2 years, I felt her, I felt my dad, and I felt my sister around me a lot,
Mm.
more so than I'd ever been done before. And then one day, and I used to kind of communicate with them, just hang out
Let's
and
let's dig into that real quick. So, just
mhm,
real quick, you say you felt them, right? So,
yes.
what would that feel like? What would that entail? Like, what type of feelings did you get from being in their presence? Were there physical manifestations, or was it just was it more feelings in your body and your soul? Tell us about that.
Yes. Okay. So there was the only thing physical about it was always over my left shoulder and up. Always. That's always where I felt them.
Was there any
And I
heat
kind
or
of
cold involved with that, or
not really. No,
okay,
I wouldn't say that.
okay,
That was really the only physicality about it as far as I recall. Although sometimes I would feel my mom behind me once in a while. I would just feel her behind me. Just that sense when there's a human being behind you, you feel their eyes on you. We
yes.
all have that ability. I would know immediately it was her.
So I wanted to talk about that too,
Hmm.
because you mentioned something very interesting. Just to jump back again,
Sure.
ADHD as well, so we might be all over the place here because there's a lot to talk about.
Okay.
But feelings, our five senses, how we experience
Hmm.
the world, right? So
Right.
I read I don't know what it was that I read, but it was talked. This is I've just so many things that I've consumed, so much material in regards
Right.
to a lot of these things.
I
I
hear you.
was reading who knows if it was it's irrelevant. But it was talking about how we have more than five senses,
Hmm.
and that was the thing that was very interesting to me because that's one of the things that you touched on, which was one of the things that was mentioned as well is like, for instance, if you were to close your eyes and someone was to very slowly put their hand in front of your face, you would be able to
Hmm.
sense that.
Yep.
And and that's obviously that comes from your eyes being closed. Like even if it's pitch black, I feel like even if it's pitch black,
Hmm.
you can still sense that.
Right.
So
Right.
and that may be just the wind, a little bit of vibrations or the wind or air displacement on our face, allowing us to feel that because our face is sensitive. But then
Right.
at the same time, like you said, there's also a very similar feeling that comes from being watched.
Right.
Where like you're doing something like this and there's somebody over your
Hmm.
shoulder and there's no real indication they didn't make a noise, or
Yep.
maybe you're at a park and it's just,
Hmm.
some weirdo across the way who's watching you and you just get
Right.
this feeling and you look behind,
Hmm.
and that feeling is confirmed. And
Right.
I'm sure that you believe. I believe that
Oh, I know
and
it. Yeah.
not in everybody, but I believe that sense, which does exist,
Hmm.
can be also translated to, like you said, incorporeal things,
Hmm.
spiritual things, paranormal things. Now, I don't believe that everybody can always sense those things all the time, and like you said, I believe that it has to do with well, in my experience, I've
Hmm.
seen that it has more to do with uh people that have, like you said, are in tune with this or have been acclimated with the spiritual or supernatural. You know, oh well, for instance, somebody who had a feeling where there was hands on their back when they were very young. That allowed them to be opened up into being a little bit more receptive, perceptive to a spiritual natural presence behind them, like you said. And I think that's very important too. Is that no, not everybody can sense these things, but I think everybody has a little bit of that in them, you know?
You can learn. I've
Yes.
actually I've studied qigong healing, which is an energy modality.
Hmm.
We are energy. We're made of energy. That's what we are. The world is energy.
Yeah.
And another way to describe that is spirits. Spirit is energy. And I believe what you're talking about is the aura, the energetic body that surrounds our physicality,
Yeah.
our
The
physical
aura
body
or spiritual
body.
presence.
Yeah, same thing. I mean, that's the problem. I was talking about how labeling these things can be so problematic,
Hmm.
because you can say spirit to one person, energy to another, and they'll mean completely different things.
Right.
Or they can be the same thing. But I have done this many times. If you stand in the supermarket and, if you're online, just stare at the person's head, like a couple of people in front of you. Just stare at it. And invariably they will at some point turn around and look to see who's looking at them.
Yeah.
It's
I've never
innate. I
done that,
think
but that's interesting. I might do that
yeah,
actually.
it's another survival thing we have. Um, So, and I
and
believe
that's
we all
energy,
have
right?
these things. We all have it. I think
That's
it's just a matter of sensitivity.
that
You know,
has to be energy because like you said,
right?
like there's no other way for you. Well, there's no real way for you to know
Mm-hmm.
what somebody's staring at your head, but somehow you know somebody's staring at your head. The feeling of being watched, and it's interesting because
Right.
I feel like sometimes I can tell
Hmm.
if I get a feeling that I'm being watched, and sometimes I'll be able to tell if it's malevolent or if it's just just
Yes.
um something.
Yes.
There's a difference.
Yes,
I f-
there is, and that I believe is being empathic. You have that antenna, and it's
yeah.
also an antenna I find that tells you if something's true or not. You know,
Yes.
you know when someone's lying to you, when someone's telling you the truth. You know, maybe it's a lie they believe, but you'll pick up on the fact that they believe this. You know, it's
Yes.
true for them. You
Yeah.
know, that's empathic. I believe. I believe
Hmm.
that's being an empath. Which, if, if you're interested in this stuff, chances are you're an empath. You know, that's kind of how it
Right.
works. You know.
Right.
Brian, have you ever had an experience where you kind of felt something weird and someone was either someone or something was looking at you, or maybe you turn around and there was just nothing there?
Well, all the time at work. I always feel like the boss is just kind of like watching my computer and like seeing what I'm doing, but that might just be because
That'd
I'm
be
trying to
paranoia.
have, yeah, paranoia or just like a heightened sense of sensitivity to what
Yeah.
I'm doing and what other people are doing and how I'm
Yeah.
performing and constantly like
Yeah.
that. I do have like random feelings where I feel like I'm being like a pressure from the outside, like from behind, like
Mhm.
random places like parks,
Mhm.
nowhere like significant, and it really doesn't happen any more than like one or two times. Um, but yeah, I've been like staring at these like pictures that you sent me.
Mhm.
This bucket one, I
Oh,
really
yeah.
like, and I do not know why.
That's another
Um,
angel experience. I'll have to tell you about that one too.
I like this picture
Mm.
a lot because it looks like the bucket is kind of like the way it's painted is like faded from reality.
Right. Right.
Really cool. I like the illustrations a lot, by the way.
Well, thank you very
Um,
much. I taught
but
myself Photoshop, so
oh, good for
Really?
you.
yeah.
Yeah, I like it. I don't. This bucket one stands out to me more than the others.
Well, I can pick. I mean, we don't have to go in order. I can talk. That's another angel experience. And as a matter of
Yeah, why
fact,
don't
I
you talk
think
about the bucket? We'll pull it up on the screen. Tell us a little bit
sure.
about this bucket, and then we'll transition into something else too.
Okay. So fast forward many years. Now I'm a single mom. My daughter is, I think she was probably 2, 3, around that age at this point.
Hmm.
And I lived in Queens, New York, and I worked on Long Island. It was about an hour commute each way every day. And I had my first car. If you live in New York City, you don't necessarily have a car. It's more of a
Right.
liability than
Right.
a benefit, you know. But my work moved from Manhattan to Long Island. So I had to learn how to drive and get a car in like 2 weeks, which I did. But I was never really a car person. And I was already older. I was like 25, I think, at that point. So I had a rust bucket, piece of crap car. Um, and one day, and it would break down on me constantly. In those days, cars broke down. I was just telling my daughter this the other day. Cars broke down a lot. You don't see that as much anymore.
Yeah.
Cars would break, it was just the way the combustion engine was in those days. Anyway,
Mm.
so this car broke down a lot. And one day, it was a hot day, and I was coming off the Long Island Expressway onto the Cross Island Parkway, um, wall to wall traffic. Old parkway. I think it was like 3 lanes. It was an old Indian trail. It kind of was convoluted mess, and it ran right along part of the East Bay. And all of a sudden, my car died, and I was so fed up at this point. And here comes the tow truck. They're always there. And I said, damn it, I'm not going to. And I knew that if I turned the ignition enough times, it would start again. And
Right.
sure enough, it started. But I only got about a mile and a half, and my car crapped out again. And now I'm in the slow lane right next to a railing between the railing and the bay, the water. There's just a little green verge and some bushes. And people I had passed were fishing and that kind of thing. Very hot day in New York City. And I'm there in my high heels and stockings, sweating buckets, and wondering, what do I do now? And people would pull up behind me and give me the finger and go around me, pull up behind me,
Mm.
give me the finger, go around me. It was like that.
Yeah, you're being
So
rude.
oh yeah, I mean, along comes this
How
kid.
dare you?
Along comes this kid with a fishing pole over his shoulder and this white bucket. And he leans down and looks at me, and I just got a cold chill.
Mm,
And he said, "What's going on?" Or something like that. And I said to him, my car does for cell phones. Would you please go and call a tow truck for me or the police for me? Whatever I said, I don't know. I couldn't wait to get rid of him. He
mhm,
dropped his bucket down outside my car on the other side of the little, divider,
mhm.
and walked away. And I knew the way he was going, he was not going to find a phone because I had just come that way. I
Right.
took my wallet, shoved it under my seat real quick. And before he left, he said to me, "Watch my fish, please. Don't let anybody take my bucket of fish." And I'm not kidding, lady. Freaking watch my fish. I don't want to curse on your radio
Mm.
station,
Right.
but he said something else.
Mm.
Watch my fish.
Oh
And after a
wow.
while, I'm starting to get really nervous. I lean out my window and I look into the bucket. The bucket is completely empty. There's not even any water in it. So now I'm like freaked out, like, who is this guy? And his eyes, I remember his eyes were really creeping me out. But I
Mm.
had chills from the minute I laid eyes on him. So I was,
Well,
I
what was going on
guess,
with his eyes? What
I
was going on
don't
with his
know. His
eyes?
eyes looked like black, mean. He was a young kid, but his
Oh.
eyes looked like black and mean. It just did not, it looked otherworldly bad
Mm.
to me. If you see my cards, they're black eyed kids.
Mm.
He
Let me take
struck
a
me as
look.
one of those, but I
Really?
don't remember his whole eyes being black. I just remember these really dark, dark eyes that were just mean. Anyway,
Something off,
so
huh?
all of a sudden, this car pulls up behind me. It was an old Rambler, which is really an old, boxy, beat up car. This
It's like a
guy
Mm.
gets,
station wagon, right? A Rambler?
no, it was like a box. I swear to God, it was almost just like driving a box. Beat up looking car, beat up looking like some kind of green or whatever.
Pull
This
one up, Brian.
big, tall guy gets out, skinny guy in a pale blue leisure suit. I'll never forget this because it was like from another decade. And he had this long white beard and sandals on his feet. And he
Oh
walks up
no.
to the car and he's got these bright blue eyes. And he says to me, "I'm going to push you. Just take it out of park." So I'm like, okay. He bangs on the back of my car. He starts
Uh-huh.
pushing me. Cops come up next to us, and the cop on the loudspeakers, "Stop pushing the car. We'll take over from here." But he didn't. He kept pushing me. The cops just took off. He pushed me into this marina that was on the side of the road there. My car rolled nicely down the hill. He followed me. Put the car in park. I went to go under my seat to get the wallet. I was going to give him a couple of bucks. I turned around. There was no car.
Gone.
And there
Wow.
was
Just
no
gone.
way, he was going to get out of there without me seeing him because it was like a long, winding entrance off the parkway into this marina.
Mm.
Never forget that. And there was a phone booth right there. I was able to call for help.
Wow.
Wow.
So that was another one. And was I in some kind of danger? Every fiber in my being said I was. I don't know why or how I was, but there was nothing in that bucket. And I'll never forget the feeling when I looked in that bucket, like, what was this about?
And did
This
he
guy is nuts.
no did the little did the kid did he go off in the direction you guys went when he
No, no,
pushed you or the
he
other
went in the
way?
opposite. He went the opposite way. He
Oh,
went the way
okay.
I came,
Hmm.
and the guy who pushed me further down the road, probably a good couple of miles before that entrance.
Huh. That's
At which
interesting.
point there was civilization. There was a marina there. There was.
Right,
I could
right.
have gone inside, I suppose. I don't remember. It was going back a long ways. I don't remember exactly what I did except making that phone call.
And so yeah, and back in those, I was just thinking, like back in those days, like things that would happen, like you said, no cell
Yeah,
phones, just people passing by, like people, I,
yeah,
I hesitate to say this, but people disappeared a lot more than they do now.
absolutely.
I hope, I,
Yeah.
I don't want to say I hope that that's true because that would be horrible for the people back then, but like I'm assuming just
Mhm.
based on with our technology, I mean it's still, I know it still happens. I mean
Right. Well, you have your
there's
cell
still
phone. I mean,
truckers.
that just the cell phone alone, and what a world of difference that is.
Yeah, yeah. Even if people do just release, they know where they last were, and it's a lot easier to find. So
Right.
yeah,
Right.
that's a very interesting story.
Yeah.
Now I know
Yeah.
we were talking about
Mhm.
before we switch gears real quick, we were talking about the feeling the presence of your family,
Right.
and how that had impacted you across the years. Tell
It
us more
just
about that.
it just felt like love. It just felt like a connection. Like it felt like when my husband's home, I'm conscious of him being here even if we're not interacting, or my daughter or my dog. like any connection, you just feel the presence of someone that you love who's around you, you
You
know?
just know they're there. Yeah,
You just
yeah.
know they're there, you know? You don't have to think about it. There's no thought involved. Well, it's more or less like that. I kind of felt, and once in a while I'd say, well, thank you for being here, guys, whatever, you know?
Yeah.
And then came a day out of the blue, and a lot was going on in my life in those 2 years after my mom died. Came a day out of the blue where I felt my mom more clear than ever say, gotta go now. And I was like, okay, whatever, it's fine. I'm fine. Go ahead, do your thing, you know? Well, that was September 10th, 2001.
Oh
So I
no.
can only surmise that that they were helping people in the World Trade Center, which was only 70 miles from where we were, you
Mm.
know, at that point.
Hmm. That's
Um,
well, that's a whole thing then. That's I mean,
yeah. And that was it.
we've gotten into some World Trade Center stuff on this podcast, but I don't think this isn't the
Yeah.
mode to go on a tirade about
Yeah.
that.
Right. Right.
That's actually
I mean, definitely with
I sh-
spirits and ghosts probably floating
n-
around Trade Center.
now
You know,
that's something
absolutely. I
I'd
mean,
like to look into. I wonder if
nobody
anybody
said that to
else.
me. She didn't say to me, I have to go do this X, Y,
Yeah.
or Z. Nope. But it was just shocking to me that the next day this happened. Like
I'd want
there's got to be some kind of connection there, you know?
that'd be something
Mm,
interesting to do is gather an aggregate of supernatural stories surrounding before and around
9/11. Yeah.
9/11 and
Well, a lot
see
of
like
people had premonitions, right?
yeah, I believe
Yeah.
that they did, but
Hmm.
I haven't I haven't looked into that, but I mean I think I might want to. That's something that we could do at a later time, Brian. That's something we
for
Somebody
should
sure.
somebody mentioned George Norrie,
yeah,
with
I
Coast
did.
to Coast, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
He talks about his daughter having had a 9/11 premonition, a
Really?
dream. Yeah.
Huh.
That she was
I did
walking.
not
She
know
didn't know
about
where
that.
she was. She was in a city and walking in ash, like up to her knees, you know?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
Before
scary.
9/11, that's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And from what I understand, quite a few people had that kind of premonition. I don't get that kind of premonition. I just get like stuff that doesn't matter. It doesn't
Right.
matter to me, you
Well,
know?
here's the thing. We talked about this off air
Mhm. Right.
initially. So dreams, we can actually shift focus. I know I've talked. I think I may have been on the podcast in the past talked about my dream that I had to where I was, in a mundane situation, ended up happening
Mhm.
a couple
Right.
years later. So what I found, and something you mentioned about yours, you had when you were on a bus going to a new job, right?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Just for the
Mm.
audience is mine. Obviously we talked to people a little bit before we were on the podcast, and we were
Sure.
talking about dreams. And I had a dream when I was young, being in a classroom in a
Mhm.
different state, or actually I didn't know where it was. It was just someplace I'd never been, and I kind of dismissed it, but I also filed it away because it was so real. And then I was in that situation years later in a different state, in a different school. And
Right.
just to be clear, it was it wasn't a deja vu. It was a whole 5-10 minutes of situation that happened. And I
Mhm.
know that Patricia had something similar. Tell us about yours,
Yeah.
Patricia. Like what happened, and I want to touch
Yes.
on a reasoning behind this.
I had a couple of those. One was as I had mentioned about the job. I dreamt I was on a bus going to a job, a new, and it felt so familiar, and it felt so real, and it felt so normal. This dream, yet it felt so profound. It felt like I was really living it, not like it was just a dream. You know, there's a distinction between the kind of dream that's just like kind of a bunch of gibberish and the kind of dream where you just know it's real, like
Hmm.
you're interacting with a real world. Well, this was one of those, and it was couldn't have been more mundane, more workaday. Just sitting on a bus, beautiful sunny day, and I remember coming to an intersection, and that was going to be my stop. And I remember seeing the sign on the bus, and it was called Greenvale, which is a place in Long Island. Well, I think it was about 4 years later I wound up working in Greenvale. This was when, I had to do that reverse commute and learn how to drive. Well,
Hmm.
this happened to be one of those days when my car was down once again and it was in the shop and I actually had to take the bus to work. It's like an hour and a half trip by bus.
Hmm.
And first time I ever did it by bus. And I remembered as I was getting off that bus having had that dream like 4 years before. And I remember it was the winter when I dreamt it and it was summer when it happened.
Now, so when how long had you been at that job?
At that point, that's a good question. Let me think. Well, it would have been a while because I would probably say at least a year at that
Okay.
point, maybe a little longer even.
Because I was thinking, I know that my situation was, it was like a totally different, different. Even though the situation was mundane, I was
Hmm.
in a place that I had never been before, and I didn't know if that was
Right.
significant or not. And I was trying to think if there was any parallels between yours and mine. Like, to be
Hmm.
honest, I mean, I guess I could, if I looked hard enough, I could find a parallel. Um,
Right.
I was thinking it was kind of interesting because it was the first time you'd taken the bus, which was a new experience for you as well.
Right.
So I mean, it could be anything, and I wondered that, and that's something like
You know,
maybe
we,
we'll
we
look into
talked
as
a little
well.
earlier about dreams and
Yeah,
how, or is it, perhaps this was when we spoke before this
I think it
interview,
was. Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
that maybe they're not what we call air quote dreams, but we're actually out of body. We're actually doing other things in other places, in other dimensions, of which I believe there are many. Maybe one of them has to do with time, and we're just sort of tripping out on time. Like I was really there in the future for that moment, for those 5 seconds. You were really there for those few seconds in that classroom, you know? So it could be a time thing, even because there was no other point to it for me. I mean, it wasn't like anything it was warning me about, and it doesn't sound like yours was either. There
No,
was absolutely no real rhyme or reason to it.
no.
So it feels almost like a time slip in a way.
Yeah, and it does because like especially with well, not especially, but with mine, I didn't like. I don't really remember interacting impactfully with the situation that was happening around me.
Hmm.
And that's pretty much what happened. It was just people talking or whatever in a classroom, going over some information, a teacher who was super charismatic talking about some stuff, and I don't think I really had
Hmm.
anything to say. I don't remember if I said anything. But like
Right.
I don't in I have deja vu a lot too. And sometimes when
Hmm.
I start to have deja vu, I try to like say or do something contrary to what I remember. And then
Hmm.
sometimes, or most of the time, like when I do that, then I realize that that's just what happened in the deja vu as well, and it's weird. And
Right.
I don't know if that's a normal behavior or to try to break
Hmm.
out of. I don't know. It's naturally like I'm inquisitive in regards to that because it happens so often, and I want to know more about it, and I don't know a better way to
Yeah.
learn about it rather than experimenting with my own experiences.
I don't know that anybody really knows. I think it's all a grand experiment. And I think, we talk about that veil, we think about that veil, and I think because of the Judeo-Christian upbringing that we have, we tend to think about that in one way and one way only. Like on the other side of the veil are the ghosts, the spirits, our families, the saints, the God, Jesus, Buddha, whoever. I don't think that's how it is. I think on the other side of that veil are endless, endless dimensions of life, of teeming with life. And I think sometimes that life slips through here. So we'll see cryptids, or we'll see ghosts, or we'll see things from fractures of time. I think it's such an amazing kind of melting pot of life, of all possibilities. It's so much bigger than our brains can conceive of. And I did have that near death experience, albeit a very, very brief one, where that kind of confirmed that for me, that everything is so much different, so much bigger than we think.
Tell us about that.
So that one was, and you'll see, I think one of the pictures here has a glass of water and a bottle of pills.
Hmm.
I had, I want to say this was probably around 04, 05. I had, no, maybe 03, 02, 03, 04, somewhere in the early 2000s. I had some extensive oral surgery,
Hmm.
and I knew I don't do well on pain pills. They make me sick.
Mhm.
But
Hmm.
I was in so much pain, I took a quarter of a Vicodin. And sure enough, I started vomiting. And of course, before you go for oral surgery, or like any surgery, you can't eat anything.
Right.
So here I had an empty stomach. Well, I was vomiting from the beginning of from when I got home, all day and all night.
Oh,
No food, no nothing, and it was just like dry heaves. If you've ever
yeah, that's
been there,
horrible.
that's
I've been
lovely,
there.
right?
Yeah.
So I got up in the middle of the night and I went to the bathroom once again to vomit. And all of a sudden, I see the last thing I remember is seeing the floor coming up at me.
Mm.
And next thing I know, it was like flip a switch. I'm no longer this person. I'm no longer Pat. I'm no longer human. I have no connection to this identity, this world, nothing. I'm suspended gently, lovingly in a vast void of black velvet. And I'm just hanging there and very slightly swaying. And I have been there forever. For time immemorial, I have been there. And the feeling and the sense is complete love, not more than love, bliss, complete bliss. I am hanging in this spot, blissed out, and I know everything. I know everything there is to know about the world, about life, about reality, about existence. And as I'm hanging there, all of a sudden I feel something coming at me. And I had 360 vision. I could see all
Mm,
around me, but there was nothing to see. It was just velvet blackness everywhere. All of a sudden, I feel something approaching me from sitting here now. I can say it would have been from my right side behind on an angle and coming at me really fast. Well, whatever this thing was, it hit me so hard. And what it was my voice, this voice that you're hearing now. And the voice said, "Oh shit, I'm supposed to be doing that." Doing that mean living that human life. And it was in that moment I felt so remiss, like I had missed my cue, like I was in a Broadway play and I
Right.
forgot what I was doing. It was so urgent that I get back there. I have
Right.
never felt. I've always described it this way. Say you left your baby in a high chair, your 6-month-old baby in a high chair with a package of razor blades in front of him with the stove on, and you just got in your car and drove 30 miles away and didn't even realize you did that. And suddenly you realize you'd be like, oh shit,
Yeah.
what do I do? Like this was so desperate a feeling. Boom, I was back in my body. And there I am laying on the floor of my bathroom. I had hit my head. I must have went like straight down. I had hit my head on the sink and knocked myself literally out of my body. Now, how close to death I was, I don't know, because there was nobody that I would, I have no idea. How long was I in that state? I don't know. Because hanging there in that state, it felt like it could have been forever.
right.
And I had all this knowledge while I was there, but I brought back with me nothing except this impression of something I had been ruminating about while I was hanging there. And that rumination was about time, about the nature of time, and I was seeing time as it ran in parallel rivers. And I knew that we could experience time in different ways. And somehow that was the key to everything. And the way I saw it was like you could dip into this river and experience time this way, or you could dip into that river and experience time that way. I couldn't tell you any more about it. That's all I remember. Um,
Incredibly interesting, though.
and that was it. That was it. And, that incident forever changed me. That and the experience with my dad were the two biggest things that have changed my life, really. I mean, I've had a life of a lot of trauma, a lot of tragedy, yet I feel like one of the luckiest people in the world because I get the fact that we are not this. We are not what we think.
Right.
It's not who we are, it's what we are. We are not these humans. We're something else. And we're huge. And we hand our power over so readily to other sources while we're in these meat suits, religions and
Yeah.
governments and things like that. Yet we are such powerful beings. We have no clue. And so many people have near death experiences try to explain this, like try to get people to understand that this isn't it. This is just like a game we're playing. It's like we're in a
Right.
play. You're in a play, I'm in a play, and we're here to play our parts, and we're here to play them as best we can. And for whatever reason, it's important that we're doing this. It's real
Right.
important that we're doing this. That's the only takeaways I have.
That's actually incredible. To actually think about that, to have an
Mhm.
experience like that, and so when you were describing like the urgency to get back, like I'm
Yeah.
familiar. It was like
Hmm.
almost it's like a compulsion, a compulsive, almost like a compulsive panic. Like
Yeah.
it reminds me of, all right, so it reminds me of like the adrenaline boost that you get when you're just trying to survive. You know,
Yes.
that's kind of like what the impression that I got, just that imperative.
It totally was. Yeah. Like fight or flight. But here's the thing, you hear about a lot of people who have negative near death experiences.
Hmm.
I believe that if I found myself in my current state of consciousness, if I
Yeah.
found myself in an endless black void alone, I'd freak out.
Oh yeah.
But because I had no connection to this identity at all,
Hmm.
I believe we exist on many levels,
Oh,
and
of
I
course.
was just like in one of them, I just like was my attention was on just one of these levels, and I'd been there forever. I mean, that much I could tell you. Whatever we are, whoever we are, part of us has been here forever, you know?
Yeah. So something very interesting. One of the pictures you sent over, I wanted to talk about was the shadow people one, because the picture that you have here that we're looking at, or that
Mhm.
this is your illustration. Um, it looks like the man in the hat, and
Oh,
he's
that's one of my cards.
oh, is it?
That's one of my oracle cards. Yeah,
Okay, the shadow
shadow
people.
man. Yeah,
Just to
shadow
confirm, now,
people.
now do you have experience with shadow people, or
I've seen shadows, but I don't think they really qualify. Like I've seen things out of the corner of my eye, but
yeah?
not shadow
Okay.
people like others have described where, they're almost solid. No.
Is there any significance there? It seems like you made this particular the one that you pulled from is a person with a hat on.
No, just because I've heard of that hat man,
Okay,
shadow
yeah, the Hat
person.
Man. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
heard of them too. I didn't know if you had any experience with them.
No,
Okay.
thank God. I
What
mean,
about the?
in a lot of ways, I've been very, very lucky. I really feel that I'm protected in some ways.
Hmm,
I've always felt that. I've
Like
always
from negative entities,
yeah, yeah, I really do.
like naturally.
Naturally protected. Whatever carried me down that flight of stairs, I think has always been with me. And I think we all have those hands with us.
You know what's funny?
Um,
Something you mentioned before. You mentioned when you were 9, like you had this like dreary feeling that you like didn't want to
yeah,
go to
yeah,
school. I've read like other reports from people who have had like poltergeisty experiences like in their
yeah,
homes, and they all have like those like similar dreary kind of mundane
yes.
like energy draining experiences
Hmm.
before something paranormal takes place or during it. So it's
Hmm.
actually like a really
Yes.
similar feeling that people have reported. Just
And not
interesting.
just yeah, it is. And it's not just poltergeists. I've also read about people who have time slip experiences, like like bona fide time slip experiences where they're in one place and all of a sudden it's like they find themselves in a different time, like the cars on the
Hmm.
street change. They also describe that oppressive, almost black and white kind of feeling um, while they're in this time slip kind of
Hmm.
situation. That and there's that fella who the Bermuda Triangle. When they talk about that, I
Right.
forget his name now. He was actually in like some kind of in his plane, some kind of vortex. Bruce something, Gersten maybe. He describes having like all the whoever was in the plane with him. He was a pilot. All his instruments failed. This is over the Bermuda Triangle. He said he was in like a cloud tunnel, what felt like a cloud tunnel, and he had that feeling of just everything slowed down, everything feels oppressive and heavy
Bruce
and devoid
Gurnock.
of life.
Yeah.
You're right, that it was a feeling like that. I never thought about that before.
Yeah, I think
Oh,
there's you mentioned like there's more than what meets the eye kind of theme.
Yeah,
There's definitely more than one dimension reality at play
yeah,
in front of us that we're not always aware of.
yeah.
And there's different ways to tap into them, whether it be meditation,
Hmm.
natural intuition, you know,
Yeah,
psychotropic drugs, like whatever it
yeah.
really is. I've talked to
Hitting your
several
head on the
people,
bathroom sink.
right? However, it gets you there, it produces
Yeah,
these out of body experiences
yeah.
um, that I believe are shared, whether there's like entities there, aliens there, it's all at play. And I personally believe that there's nothing malicious, or there can be malicious intent about it, but I think that at heart, I think it's all I think it's all good, and there's nothing that is really gonna be out there to hurt anybody or cause like ill malice or anything like that.
Absolutely. And just like I said, with my near death experience, my near death like experience, if I had been in full comprehension of this identity, I would have been terrified. So
Right.
it's all in the way you perceive it. I agree. I think the world, I forget who said that. The world is here for us. Reality is here for us, not against us. But sometimes, especially if you have a lot of childhood trauma, you can your default position is that the world is against you.
Right.
The world is not a good place,
Right. The
and I think a lot of people feel that way,
the system has theoretically failed that individual, so therefore they have
Right.
a negative connotation about
Right. And
experiences there on
it's
out.
just default pose, and I think it's important to try to work your way out of that,
I
because
agree.
it's not true. It's not how reality is.
I
So
agree.
out of body experiences, I had two of those as well. I told you, Forrest Gump of the paranormal.
Yeah.
Nothing
Right.
full blown. I've seen couple of UFOs. Um, trying to think what else. I've had premonitions. The day
Talk
my
to us
dad
about the
died.
UFOs. I want to hear about your UFO experiences. We've had
Hmm.
a couple people. I think maybe a couple, maybe just one person with a really interesting experience that came on. Something that happened to them when they were young.
Hmm.
And it did also involve some time stuff,
Yep.
kind
Okay.
of. Um,
Mine both. Well, I had one as a child too, and it was like a donut shaped craft I saw way up in the sky. I didn't even include that in my book because I didn't remember enough about it. But the two that really stand out for me both happened in 2012. I was working as a counselor, and they both happened interestingly on my way home from work. One was in broad daylight. I was going home for lunch, let my dogs out. We used to raise border collies, and just driving home, not thinking of anything. Beautiful, beautiful blue sky. April morning, late morning, and I see out of the corner of my eye, and I actually could was able to look at this for a while. A regular cloud looked like kind of a low cloud, but there was this silver sphere. It looked like a gigantic BB, shiny silver sphere, and it was hard to describe. It was like moving in and out of the edge of this cloud, almost like in a sewing motion, like if somebody was sewing something, stitching, going in and coming out and going in, like that, all along the edge of this cloud. Weird, really weird. And inexplicably, I just kept driving, went home. And, it's not like I stopped the car or anything. I just was, well, that's weird. It wasn't until afterwards that I thought, wow, why didn't I stop and do something? And I hear this from a lot of people. Like life goes on. I had to get the dogs out. I had to go back to work, that kind of thing.
Right.
The same year, 2012, I used to run groups at night. So I was coming home kind of late at night from work and driving through my little town. It was a cloudy night. It was in November. And this one I actually wrote into MUFON. My report's listed there somewhere.
we've
Whoa.
had Pete
We had
Whitley
Yeah.
from
Pete Whitley.
MUFON
You
on
know
here.
Pete Whitley. Yeah.
He's the director of MUFON Japan, and we had him on for
Oh,
a
no
very
kidding.
interesting, very interesting.
These things are all over the place. I don't know
Mm.
why people don't get this. So anyway, I'm driving home and something caught my eye again through my moonroof. I look up and there are these two chevron triangle shaped craft way up high. And at first I thought it was an airplane on fire, but it was two of them. It would have been two airplanes on fire
Mm.
and they would have been stationary. So I'm staring up at these things and they were glowing. It was like a glow, red, orange, yellow, those three colors. It was glowing, but not like fire color. I can't even explain it. The edges were very soft. And I've heard and read about these shape changing UFOs that actually can change shape. And I wonder if these weren't something like that because they were definitely not nut and bolts. Definitely not. They were
Right.
more translucent. And so here's this one fairly close. If I held my hand up, it would be about the size of a dime. And then the other one was a little bit further higher than that, just a tiny bit smaller than that. And all of a sudden, they both took off at rapid speed. Like they went from a standstill to boom. Where I lived was right near the Delaware River, and I
Mm.
swear they were headed to that river, like behind me, kind of thing.
Well,
And I watched them till they got lost in the trees. So yeah,
that's something that's consistent. We hear that a lot. These
with the
crafts
water, right?
being able to change directions, accelerate extremely fast, and being seen in and around the water. And
Yep.
I have, that's not my theory, but I mean, I wonder if there's stuff, people, advanced civilizations, whatever it is, living under the ocean. You know,
Yep. I
like,
believe that. I think out in California, is it near Carmel, I think?
mm,
Off the ocean, Monterey, maybe somewhere around there. They've seen a lot of craft. Uh, I want to say it's not Capri. Maybe it is Capri Island out there off the coast of California. There's been a lot of UFO sightings and a lots of sightings going into the water.
Yeah.
And also in lakes and stuff. I mean,
Yeah,
river
and
is a
lakes
bit of
as
a
well. A
stretch,
lot
but
of these,
uh,
yeah. Uh,
so who knows? I mean, maybe the element of water has something to do. Anyway, with that one, when I got home, I actually checked the time because that one I wanted to make sure I didn't have any lost time.
mhm.
But here's the weird thing. I looked around, other people were on the street. Nobody else was looking at this.
Really?
Other cars, yeah, nobody could see this. No. Now could they not see it, or did they just not happen to see it? To me it was, you couldn't miss it. Yet
Uh,
people
well, I
didn't seem to see
remember
it.
I remember something. I saw something when I was young I was in my room and I saw like I thought it was like like a meteor like going over like a flaming ball going over the sky, right? And
Hmm.
it was like heading like towards the ocean. It was weird, and it was
There you
so
go.
bizarre that like I actually went downstairs, got my mom, and we both went outside and could still see it going over. And then we
Both of you
spent
could. Okay.
yes, yeah. So it wasn't just me. It was and it was going at a velocity to where I was able to go downstairs from the second story and get my mom, be like, "Mom, come outside and see this," and she saw it. And remember, we spent the night. Well, not spent the night, but like we were really attentive at that point. Like we were watching on the news to
Right.
see if it was mentioned,
Yep.
anything in the
Yep.
news stories, stuff like that. And there was never any mention of it. And I
Yep.
mean, and that was really bizarre too. And I don't know, man, about there's like you said, there's
Yeah.
just so much more going on
Yeah.
than meets the eye. I want to shift gears here real quick here. I want
Sure.
to kind of
Sure.
move away from this stuff, and I want to talk about
Hmm.
your tarot.
Okay.
We've not had anybody who kind of is familiar with that
Yeah,
and
it's
stuff
a
like that
first.
Okay.
ever. So
Okay.
tell me. I mean, I know it exists and stuff, and I know there's like
Hmm.
the whatever the Knight of Hearts and the Jack of Deaths or whatever they are. But tell us
Okay.
about tarot and
Well,
what
this is
how
is
that
not
works and
tarot, actually.
okay, what is it?
I have to correct you. These are oracle cards. They're
Okay,
similar
oracle
to
cards.
tarot.
Okay, so
Yeah.
tell us about this.
Tarot is like a specific suit, like you're saying. These are not. I'll tell you, this was a really strange thing. I talked about the fire. We lost everything in 2019.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Everything, lifetimes worth of everything we lost.
Well, we actually talked
And
about that off air, but I mean, we don't really need to get into it. I'll probably be honest
no,
with you,
so
but there was
so
a tragedy, of course.
it was a tragedy. And so here we are at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. My husband and I were living in like extended stay Hilton hotel, waiting to settle with the insurance company. And all of a sudden, COVID hit, right?
Oh
Early
no.
2020. So here we are in an international hotel, and my husband has COPD, and we're an older couple, so we were planning to move down to North Carolina, where our daughter is, one of our daughters.
Hmm.
But we weren't planning to move right then. But COVID hit, and we said, you know what? We have nothing. Let's just get in the car and go. So that's what we did. So I found
Really?
myself in North Carolina, and my husband went back to New York. He's an attorney. I was down here by myself, living by myself for the first time, because he had to settle with the insurance company. He had a practice that he had to maintain and start, reeling in that kind of thing. So I found myself in a stranger in a strange land. I've never been out of New York in my life, to live. And I started wondering, like, what's my next step here? What do I do now? And one night I had this profound, profound dream. And it was a dream, interestingly, about tarot cards. And the tarot cards were strewn about the floor in this dream. I was in a cafeteria full of people, and the tarot cards were strewn about the floor. And in the Harry Potter movies, where in the newspaper, the characters inside the picture are actually alive and moving,
Yeah.
Yes.
that's what was happening in these tarot cards. And in one of the tarot cards, I could see a holy well, Irish, and in Ireland, you find a lot of these holy wells. They were first pagan, but then the Catholic Church built churches up around them, right?
Right,
So
right.
I'm looking at this holy well, and I'm sitting at this table full of people, and I see this priest there, and he like turns his back, like, and all of a sudden I look up, and there's these three, I want to call them fairies, and they look at me and they start giggling. Well, when I got up, I felt like, what is this dream trying to tell me? And I'm an artist and a writer. And I said, you know what? Maybe I should start do my own cards. That was like the idea that came to me. And it was like, I think I was telling you last night about the book. It was kind of the same thing. At that point, I was just driven. It's like I'm
Right.
being pushed by something beyond myself. And
You,
so, go ahead.
sorry, I was just gonna ask. Can you explain like a little bit how the oracle cards like work? Are they
Sure.
predictions? Like what are I know there's like
Yes.
one
Well,
spirit guide, UFOs,
they're an
pendulums.
oracle. They're an oracle like any oracles can have any kind of subject matter, you know. They basically are a way of divining, you know, divination. How should I handle this problem I'm having? And you pull a couple of cards, or you do
Oh,
a
I
card
see. So
spread.
someone
Okay.
brings you a specific situation, and it's kind
Right.
of like a guide, if you will.
Exactly. So I
Interesting.
said, I never did anything like this before. So I said, guys, if you want me to do these cards, you're going to have to tell me what they mean. And I knew it was going to be paranormal because I'm obsessed with paranormal.
Right.
So
Of
that was my
course.
decision, right? So I started writing down all these paranormal subjects that I could think of. And then I just started channeling, like, what does each card mean? And I would just sit there with a pen in my hand and I would just channel whatever came to me for each card. And a lot of them are not anything I would have picked, you know?
Right.
Um, so that was how they came to be. And then I taught myself Photoshop and I worked on them and worked on them and worked on them, got them published. It's very expensive to do this. It's not expensive to do, but it's expensive if you want to actually sell them. You know what I mean?
Oh, I see.
Because
Yeah, I
it's
expect so.
So
yeah,
these
because it
particular ones you came up with, and you kind of use them in your readings, your oracle
yes,
readings.
on
I
my
see.
YouTube channel. Yep.
Cool. Have you
So what?
ever? Sorry,
Go
have you
ahead.
ever had any experiences where you've done a reading for somebody and they've come back to you with feedback or results from that?
Um, yes, I would have to say I have here and there.
Okay, cool.
Mostly, I don't. Mostly, that came as a result of other people buying them, like the reviews I got from people
Oh,
buying them,
interesting.
saying this is exactly what I needed. I because I kind of think we have free will. So, and the way I see it, the future comes at us. I like, here's how I see it. I see it in terms of three television screens, and they're coming at me. And there's three possibilities of how something will turn out. And it's not until I get closer, one will fall away. And now I only have two possibilities, and I'm getting closer still. And these fall away depending on the actions that I take in life, in general.
Right.
Now the second one will fall away. Now it's right on top of me, and this is now the only possible outcome. So
Mm,
I can't really say that I believe in predicting the future because
right.
I believe the future is malleable until we're right on top of it.
Agreed.
But
Right.
what these cards do is kind of tell you where maybe you're off track because I
Oh.
feel like if we stay true to ourselves and if we stay connected to who we really are as spirit, I believe we have to be citizens of two worlds. We have to be in this material world, we got to bust our asses, make a living, that kind of thing. But we're also citizens of the spirit, and that's who we really are. That's where home is. But we've spent our lifetimes trying to balance this.
Mm.
And I think it's important that we remember that. And I feel like the cards kind of help you kind of stay on track with that. Not just my cards, all oracles or
Right.
tarot. I think we're constantly getting. Robert Moss wrote a book called Sidewalk Tarot, and what that means is, you're walking down the street and the world is constantly giving you feedback. If only you'd
Ah.
learn to read it, right? Like the three crows. I talked about the three crows representing my three pets that I lost in the fire.
Hmm.
Those three crows are a message to me that come through the universe, from them. And I
Right.
just know it. Nobody has to tell me. I just know it inside. And learning to trust that feeling, that little kick you get, like, oh yeah, that is what that means. That is meant for me. It's not just three birds. It's a message.
Mhm.
If you learn to trust that, but most of us don't because we kind of go with the material world. We lean in that direction where it says, come on, it's just three birds, Pat, for Christ's sake.
Well, not
Right.
Well,
even that. Well,
I've
not
learned to
even.
not see it that way.
Well, not even just that, but I mean,
Mhm.
our world tells us to, discount the supernatural and only
Right.
and worship what you can touch and you can see. You know what
Yep.
I mean? And the world tells us, if you're in touch with these, with your spirit, if you're in touch with the spirit of whatever's around you, if you believe, um, things that you can't see, if you have faith that you're somehow crazy, or you're less than, or you're a
Hmm.
fundamentalist, or
Right.
this and that. I
Unless
think
it's
it's I think
unless it's a
it's
prescribed faith. unless it's
Yeah,
an okay faith, right? We
exactly.
need to follow more of the indigenous peoples of this world who have a more raw connection to the earth and to spirit, you know?
I think that it's important for people in general, uh, for me, maybe I'll speak for myself, to just be true to what I think is what I can
Mhm.
instinctively believe or feel,
Right,
and I don't know if I don't even want to put people in a box or put anything in a box and say, well,
right.
these indigenous views or things that came before us are necessarily the right way or the wrong
No,
way. I think that there's a good foundation,
yep.
in all of these, in
Hmm.
in all beliefs, to try to get to where to where we could be, and
Yes.
and I think it's like you said, these things are like they're almost like a muscle, where something
Hmm.
you work them out, you continue to, like you said, you listen to the feelings, you learn to trust your instincts. See, that's the thing that happens.
Hmm.
People tell you that. I've heard this from like police officers, from
Yes.
military people, that the ones that it's when in situations you want to trust your instincts. You
Yes.
trust what you trust your feeling, and I've heard so many stories about these same types of people or anybody. Oh, I trusted my
Hmm.
feelings, and or I heard something just said I needed to duck, and something whistled by my
Yes.
head, or we've heard these stories. I've heard the
Hmm.
stories of somebody screamed. I don't know who. I don't remember. I mean, I've heard them. You know what I'm saying. So
Yeah. Yeah.
these I think it's important,
Hmm.
to, like
Absolutely.
I said, listen to these things, work out your spiritual muscles,
Hmm.
as it were. I know a lot of people do use different ways to do this. Like you said, they might use these oracle cards or tarot
Right.
cards to kind of point themselves in the right directions.
Right.
Meditation,
Hmm.
prayer. I mean, whatever works for anybody. I don't think that anybody should discount anybody else's ways
Totally
of,
agree.
yeah, ways,
Hmm.
whatever staircase, whatever door you go through to find your awakening. I mean, I
Yep.
think it's good. I mean,
Yep.
and I think that's really important.
Hmm.
Um,
I think
just
we
for
need to think of these things, all these things, even religions, as a tool.
Yeah,
And a tool can be used for good or bad, right? I mean,
absolutely.
in my ancestors sacrificed human beings, to the gods,
Yeah,
and
most
from what we
most
can
ancient
tell,
civilizations did.
all
You know.
civilizations did, right? And
Yeah.
then along comes the Catholic Church and they put an end to that. Yay. But the Catholic Church all of a sudden develops the Spanish Inquisition, right?
Yeah.
You know what I
But
mean?
is it much
So
different?
anything can be used as a tool for good or bad. You can build a home or you can beat someone's head in with a hammer,
Right.
right? I mean,
And speaking of tools,
mhm,
I do want to say, we will have the link in the description to the Oracle cards. I believe it's an Etsy link that you sent to us. So if
right.
people listen to this and they want to kind of check those out or maybe
Yep.
support you, also your book, some of the illustrations we talked about, we'll have that link as well in the description here,
Okay.
for Patricia's website too, and her YouTube page. So I know
Yep.
she's done some readings on the YouTube as well.
Yep.
Patricia, I really appreciate you coming on here, and spending some time with us. We've spent about an hour and 15 minutes on this. I mean, I feel like we
Okay.
could spend another 3 hours.
Yeah. Right.
To be honest, Brian, thanks for being here. Thanks for showing the pictures, obviously
Of
co-hosting,
course.
also the pander here,
My pleasure.
with Patricia. There was a lot more things I really wanted to get into, but at the same time, I don't want to go too long and have and have people be like, wow, man, it's just too overwhelming. I want to take these in little in snippets, maybe,
Hmm.
hour and 15-minute snippets. But Patricia, we'd love to have you back maybe at some
Sure.
point, in the future. I
Absolutely. It's
really
been
enjoyed talking to you. Is there anything you wanna finish with, end cap here for our audience, and for your peace of mind?
sure.
Just
I
kind of
do.
sum
I do
things
want to
up.
mention something about the cards. I'm right in the middle of transition. As I mentioned, I was trying to keep the price down when I first began with them. So what I did was I confined the descriptions. I mentioned those channel descriptions
Hmm.
to my website, so that people who bought the cards could, for free, download those extended descriptions from my
Oh, cool.
website. I'm
Oh, cool.
changing that. I'm putting that into a bona fide book now.
Oh, wow.
So there's a little bit of a glitch. I think have a very, very small inventory on my Etsy site, but I'm
Okay.
in
Hmm.
the process of revamping those so that they will now contain a bona fide book. So it's going to be a
Oh,
little while before that comes out.
perfect.
But I did want to mention that. And I also wanted to say thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
Hmm.
It's so nice talking to people who are on the same wavelength, because in my world there are not many.
Yeah.
So I definitely appreciate my the ability to allow me to talk about my stories.
Yeah, we appreciate you taking the time and being as descriptive as you were is awesome.
Oh,
Drawings
thank you.
great, artistry great.
Thank you so much.
Well, everybody, Paradox Collective, remember, um, show love to Patricia if you can, and remember to
Think for yourself. Question authority. Think for yourself.
thanks everybody for listening, and thanks for all the support. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you have a story to tell, we'd love to hear it. Reach out to us on Reddit at The Paradox Collective, or you can email us directly at theparadoxcollective@gmail.com. Thanks very much, and have a wonderful night.